Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Team and Ambitions YouTube. Today we have a special video. I'm going to call this segment Team and Education, where we try to give you a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the nuances of trading card games. Joining me today, I have sleepyGary, Dylan Lindner, and bigolfish, Lewis Brown. How are you both doing?
I'm doing just fine. Coming off of a couple days of doing sealed events, which have been really fun.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I also did some sealed and draft events and stuff like that, and I'm just enjoying set 5 and dramatically trying to get my play sets of cards because my LGSs have decided that by as early as Monday, which is tomorrow at time of recording, that set 5 is legal and you can use your cards. So I'm like, I need to test. I need to have play sets of Daisies and Devines right now.
Yes, the mad scramble for your Prince Naveen's and your Daisy Ducks has begun, and it's been quite the weekend, gentlemen. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about limited formats. Limited has a couple of different meanings, but in Lorcana right now it means there's been two main formats. One is sealed, and one is draft. Sealed is rather straightforward. We won't dive too much into the elements of sealed, but some of the principles that we're going to talk about today also apply to sealed. If you haven't played yet a release event, sealed is basically where you just open 6 packs, which have 12 cards each. You get a pool of 72 cards, and you make a 40 or more card deck. It is not restricted by color. It does still have to follow the inkability guidelines. There's not much more thinking beyond, is this card good or is this card not good? So it's a much more beginner-friendly format in terms of you just have these 72 cards, and you just play the 40 best cards, or the 40 cards that you feel like give you the best chance to win. But today we're going to talk about draft, which is a different beast. Draft is where you basically open packs, pick a card, and pass the pack along. And then you will receive a pack that has a card missing from your neighbor to either your right or your left, and then you pick another card. So there's a lot more decision points in that. We're going to talk a little bit about those decision points. Why don't we let Mr. Dylan Lindner, sleepyGary, start us off on our conversation tonight. Dylan, what do you have to say about draft specifically?
Draft is a very interesting format. I think it really challenges a player and kind of shows their skill about assessing cards and understanding why certain cards are powerful versus cards that are not. You know, you really have to analyze cards for what they are. And rather than constructed, where you're just playing kind of the 4 of best cards that synergizes with your deck, you have to actively look at a bunch of cards who might also just be terrible. And you have to say, well, what's the best of the worst? And why is it the best of the worst? And I think that's what really ups the skill level of players, is understanding and analyzing cards via draft. But today, I want you guys to put on your little chef hats because we are going to be bakers. And today, we are baking some bread. So, what do I mean by bread?
Tasty, tasty bread.
Tasty, tasty bread. So what do I mean by bread? Well, bread is an acronym. Stands for B, will stand for bombs. So cards that just absolutely, when you play it down, your opponent's like, oh man, how am I going to deal with that? That card affects the board state immensely. So your opponent is just like, how do I deal with this card? Oh man, I'm going to lose the game if this card keeps questing or doing whatever ability it does. I have to get rid of it. R stands for removal. In limited formats, you can't play 4 of Brawl, you can't play 4 of Be Prepared, unless somehow you manage to get 4 of them in your sealed pool, which in that case, that's insane. Congratulations. But basically, removal is generally super light in a draft format, that you value it highly because there's not a lot of chances to, other than challenging your opponent's cards, to get rid of their cards. E stands for evasive or evasions. Now, it doesn't specifically mean cards that have the keyword evasive, though it does apply. It's basically cards that have some sort of way to make it harder for them to remove. Evasive, ward, resist. Cards that are a little more resilient than your just basic vanilla. A stands for attackers. Generally your aggro cards that kind of fill out your curve. You know, your 1 mana 2/2 vanilla, or your 2 mana 2/2 that quests for 2. You know, kind of something that you want to have a nice curve because realistically you can't play a limited deck with only 8 drops. And finally we have D, which is kind of like defenders or duds. Basically, I've chosen my 35 good cards and I kind of need to fill the 40 card minimum. So I'm going to play with these cards that are kind of filler. Maybe they're just ink, but occasionally have like some uses to it. Because the rest of the cards are actually just like, a 10 mana 1/1 that's uninkable. Like I'm never gonna play that. I'd rather play a 2 mana 1/1 that's at least inkable or something like that. And that's kind of the acronym of bread, and it's a general guideline that you want to follow when drafting as well as doing sealed.
It's sort of a suggested pick order, as in if a pack contains both a bomb and a removal, you would pick the bomb over the removal most of the time. Say pack one, pick one, you would take the bomb over the removal.
Yes, I would say so. You generally want to lean towards bombs, and that's why bread is that order, because it's actually ranked from where you want to pick. So obviously bombs being number one and D being last. But of course, if you're deeper into a pack, let's say your fifth pack, or maybe your third pack if you're specifically drafting, and you're light on removal, but you feel like you have a good enough bombs, by all means take the removal.
And just for anyone, just as really simple examples of bread, we're going to list one for each category just from set 5, Shimmering Skies. So I think a great example for draft and sealed of a bomb is plate armor. That's the 4-cost uninkable item that you can exert it to give a chosen character resist 2 until the start of your next turn. It might not seem very exciting because it is, at the end of the day, just 2 mouse armors and a trench coat. But this card has been wreaking havoc in a lot of games of Limited. If you are in any way like even or not behind on tempo, and you're able to place that down and get an immediate advantage, you are accruing so much value over multiple turns of giving your characters armor. It can make it really difficult. Like if your evasives that were already pretty difficult to remove, they become borderline impossible to remove. Your bodyguards that are protecting your other characters suddenly can have as much as like effectively 4 extra health for that turn, because instead of cleanly removing the bodyguard with 1 challenge, they have to use multiple challenges. So that's a great example of a bomb and a card that you might not think at first glance is exciting and powerful, but will actually win you a lot of games of Limited. The best, most straightforward example of removal in Shimmering Skies would be You're Welcome. This is a 4-cost inkable song. It's green, and it allows you to shuffle chosen character into their owner's deck. That player will then draw 2 cards. It's really one of the only cards in Shimmering Skies that straight up, no matter what else happens, that character will be removed. There are other forms of removal in the form of like the uninkable 4-drop Stitch that deals 2 damage to a character, but that's not necessarily going to be enough to guarantee. So that's certainly a kind of removal, but the best example of what we would call hard removal is You're Welcome. Following that evasive, like we were saying, the most obvious example is a character with evasive. It's really strong. There's almost nothing wrong with having as many evasive characters in your deck as you were able to get. That's almost always a valid strategy. Even if you don't need them to win the game yourself, you will need them to respond to your opponent's evasive characters. Yeah. Other examples can definitely be, like Dylan was saying, characters with resist, because even though they're not evasive in the sense that they can be challenged, they're making the combat math difficult for your opponents to deal with. If they didn't have the resist, they would be just a simple. It was like, oh, if in order to do this, I have to challenge with 2 characters. That's giving up a lot of resources just to deal with one of your things. Following that, the attacker, the aggro, the aggressive cards. There's actually a lot of good examples. There are a lot of cards in the set that quest for 2. There's a lot of 2-cost 2/2s in a variety of colors. There's a Prince Arthur. There's a Taffeta. I think there's another one. I can't quite recall, but I believe there's a lot of 2-cost 2/2s. And basically, this will come down to anything that can quest for 2 and maybe not immediately go to the discard. I would say kind of falls under the aggro category. Also, a card like Gale, I think it was an example, because it's a 1/2 that is constantly coming back to your hand, but it's also a guaranteed example of if you have time in the ink to play it, it's going to gain you a lot of floor. And then dud cards are basically any card you could look at and say, I don't really know if I want this in my deck. It's exactly as Dylan was saying, sometimes you have to fill out the numbers, you have to have at least 40 cards, and you don't always get 40 good cards. But that's actually part of the fun too, is playing with cards that you would never play with in Constructed, but you get to play with a lot of cards that otherwise would see basically no use.
So you both have experience with drafting from other card games. The primary card game, of course, is Magic the Gathering. I think we've all done a majority of our drafting through Magic the Gathering. I think some of the other games that existed were things like Duel Masters, World of Warcraft in the past. The Lorcana draft has been kind of a very interesting experience, not having to be restricted by colors, not having to be restricted to having a certain amount of lands in your deck. One of the caveats to Lorcana is that because of draft and because you're only opening 4 packs, that you have only a 48 card pool to work with. How do you guys feel like that particular card pool is restrictive relative to like something like Magic the Gathering in terms of draft?
Yeah, it's definitely very different because there's no restriction on inks. So you can play 5 colors. In fact, you kind of have to because you're only getting 48 cards, of which you're making. I mean, you could play 48 cards. You should probably be playing only 40. Mathematically, it just works out. The more cards you add in, the less likely you're going to see your bombs or your removal. So you kind of want to be at that 40. But by all means, if you want to play the 41 card special, I've done it. You've done it. Nothing wrong with that. But generally, yeah, it's trickier. Lorcana is slowly trying to get into this with the introduction of like archetypes, and what I mean by that is like in this current set there are knights, and you actually get rewards for playing knights. Where in set 1 there was no sort of synergy like that. It was just kind of play like the best stuff, and you didn't really need to build your deck towards a specific synergy. Where in Magic the Gathering it has like specific things like green red might be cards that go to the graveyard and come back. Red blue might be casting spells and drawing cards and stuff like that. And Lorcana is slowly starting to get into that idea, which I really like.
Thank you both for those lovely explanations about drafting. I think now we're going to have a kind of a more interactive part, which let's put Mr. sleepyGary and bigolfish to the test here. We're going to simulate some Shimmering Skies packs through Tabletop Simulator. We're going to give credit to Nive, Nive, for making this community on Tabletop Simulator. And we're going to open some Shimmering Skies packs. We'll give you some examples of things like a bomb, things like a removal, and so on and so forth. Okay, we have spread out the pack here for you. Please keep in mind that the images have not yet made it to Tabletop Simulator, so some of them are going to be in other languages. What are your thoughts, gentlemen, about this pack?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because we got 3 rares, and 2 of them are very high costed. Now, for example, Olaf is really strong. He's a 6/6 quest for 3 and has evasive. But 9 cost is pretty high, and I understand he does cost 1 ink less for every tapped character your opponent has. But realistically, if we're living in the best world that we are, how low do we think we can get him to go? 6 at best? 7, 8? So he's very expensive. Sheriff of Nottingham, I don't think you're going to be playing a lot of items in Shimmering Skies draft unless you're specifically really, really, really going for it. So to me, you're not really ever going to reduce him. Rafiki's interesting, and this is actually a good example of a card that could be considered a bomb and removal because he has Rush and he has Challenger 4. So he's able to really knock out something that the turn he comes in. But my pack one, pick one, and I'm interested to see what you guys think, is actually going to be Ludwig. Because he's a 5-mana inkable 4/4 that quests for 3. Those stats are very above board, and he's inkable. The only other consideration I can think is the Emerald Chromacon. I've seen it played in Limited, and it is very backbreaking because effectively your characters never really are truly gone. They always just keep coming back in your hand, and you can just keep playing that annoying bomb over and over and over again. But I think looking at this fresh pack, my pack one, pick one is definitely Ludwig.
I'm definitely looking at the same cards as you. I would say my decision comes down to 4 cards. Rafiki, Ludwig, the Emerald Chronomicon, or I would also consider the 1-cost Cogworth. I don't think he's the pack one, pick one, but I definitely would not be unhappy to have that card in my deck. I think from my perspective, I would probably take the Rafiki, and that's not always great because you definitely don't want to draft too many uninkable cards. But when I personally play, I tend to value removal, but I think the close second would probably be Ludwig, and I think it's very possible I would pick Rafiki because it's the rare, pass the pack and immediately regret not picking Ludwig.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense. And I think, let's say, okay, well, no, that's pretty simple. Like you obviously would choose your rare or Ludwig or whatever. Let's say we got rid of like the right half of these cards, and we only have Potion of Strength, Cha-Cha, Cogsworth, Rudy, Hypnotic, and Tropical Rainforest. What would you choose then? Let's say we're now going towards the last bits of packs of our cards and packs left. What would you choose?
Yeah, looking at that, I think my picks would probably be between Cogsworth and the Potion of Strength.
Yep.
Cogsworth is sort of removal. He can give something that is slow and cumbersome rush for only 1 extra ink, and then he's a free 1/1 basically. That's very efficient. Cards that can be slow to get going, like something like Monstro, that's just a good stats for the cost, are suddenly coming in and hitting something immediately. So probably getting not only 1 trade, but maybe 2 trades of value at minimum. Then the Potion of Strength is not a removal spell, but it is what people like to call combat tricks. And it's another way to make a lot of the combat math work out in your favor. And your opponent always has to remember, oh, well, for the tax of just 1 extra ink, he can give any of his characters enough attack to deal with my normally unkillable threat.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think a big reason why I also agree on the Cogsworth is it's another body. Like it quests for 1. So it's another body on there that can do combat tricks or quest or anything like that. Potion of Strength is a good card for sure. I think what I would do is a classic move of just hope that it comes back to me and that I'm able to get it, rather than Hypnotic Deduction being like one of the last 2 cards. So yeah, I definitely think I take the Cogsworth as well.
Okay, we are jumping right into another pack. Another interesting pack. Only 2 rares this time. Looks like a foil common was pulled. What do you guys think about this one?
Cards that are immediately jumping out to me would be Arthur, Archimedes, and Rapunzel's Tower, I would say. Arthur is a form of removal. 1 cost, 2/3 is very efficient. It is an uninkable card, so whether you're able to pick it or not will depend on the cards you got in your first pack, but it is a very efficient card. Archimedes is just good and efficient. He's a 3 cost, 2/2 evasive card that quests for 2. It's very efficient. If your opponent isn't able to put down an evasive character of their own to challenge it, it can easily gain you 4, 6, Lord, or just outright win you the game. As for the rares of the pack, I'm not very excited by Kristoff. Unfortunately, the odds of you getting songs is not very high. The odds of you getting songs you really want in your deck anyway are even lower. I don't think it's realistic to see him costing less than 6, even if you're really trying for him. And at that point, he's just not really great. I think you would want him to reduce him to 5 or even 4 before you're really excited to play him from your hand. Revive, I think, is a bit of a trap. The idea of reviving one of your really good 5-cost characters seems really good, and it does have the flexibility of whatever is in your discard, you'll be able to pull back. The problem there is that you often don't get to choose what's in your discard. You often just play whatever you get to draw. Maybe you don't even get to choose when it gets challenged and when it goes to the discard. So yeah, there's the possibility of getting something really great, but a lot of the times Revive is just going to be stuck in your hand. The reason I'm looking at Rapunzel's Palace is it's just a really efficient location. Although it doesn't gain you any lore, it has the ability to put a lot of stats on the board. It has 8 health itself, so it's not easy to remove, and it can give all your characters 2 extra health just for
3.
low cost of 1 ink to move them. 3, thank you. The text is a little hard to read. I'm thinking of Pride Lance that gives you 2. So yeah, it gives you even more than that, 3 health to each character. That can matter a lot. Given something like, just a pertinent example would be Archimedes. Archimedes suddenly being a 2/5 instead of a 2/2 makes him much, much more difficult to kill, even if the opponent has evasive characters of their own. For example, the 5-cost evasive Elsa is suddenly not a threat to Archimedes at all. Those are the cards that really jump out at me. There are some other cards here that I wouldn't necessarily be unhappy to have in my deck. Happy is actually a perfectly fine 1-drop, but I would not say pick him for the first card of the pack.
Yeah, and I kind of also want to akin to another reason like why Rapunzel's Tower is also interesting is because most of the time, especially in Shimmering Skies, there is not a lot of hard removal. You're welcome, Glimmer versus Glimmer is like kind of the only examples. So often removing characters is through challenging. So having that three extra little bit of booty actually makes it really hard to get them off the field. But I'm actually surprised you didn't mention Knock because I think that card is actually pretty strong. It's an inkable 5/5 that when you play, you can move 2 damage counters from any character, but most likely probably your own, and you can move it on to an opposing character. So if you have an Archimedes out and I play my Knock, the Knock just shoots down the bird. So I think it is a very strong card. This pack is very interesting. We have Arthur, even Tipo is interesting. But I think my pack one pick one is gonna be Archimedes, just because of how effectively he's costed. Like a 3 mana 2/2 with evasive, that quest for 2 is very difficult to deal with in their early turns, unless they somehow play their own Archimedes. Generally, even if he gains you 2, 4, 6 lore and then gets banished, super worth it for 3 ink. So I think my pack one pick one is Archimedes, but if I had to choose one if he wasn't there, it would be Knock for sure.
I think one interesting thing we're not mentioning is that we're just presuming. Well, I think Lewis, you suggested this, but this is the second pack. Like, let's say this was the fourth pack. Is Archimedes your choice if you have drafted no removal cards whatsoever? Is the Knock your choice if you know you don't have any evasive threats? Like, does the timing and what you have already drafted significantly change what you would pick in this pack? I think if this was a pack one, pick one, I am tempted to go Archimedes just because of the amazing amount of pressure. But if I don't have any removal at all, just because we know Shimmering Skies has a kind of a big premium for removal, I'm tempted by the Knock.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Andrew. I think a lot of it would depend on what we picked in our pack one. Like if we already have 3 or 4 uninkable cards that we know we really want to play in our deck, Arthur, no matter how tempting to look, is suddenly not really an option for us. I think you're right. I definitely did overlook the Knock, which is shameful because he was very good for me in Sealed today, actually. But that's right. That's a really good card to have at your top end. In Drafted and Sealed, it's pretty difficult to get up to 7 lore and beyond. You can do it, especially if you know you're working towards it for something really great, like the legendary genie that can just shut out your opponent if you're able to quest with him for 1 turn. But 6 is kind of what you should generally consider as the top end of your deck, unless you have, like I just said, a really great reason to go beyond 6 ink. You're often not going to, and there's going to be many games where even if you want to, you're not always going to be able to get to 6. But it is definitely worth considering this card in this time.
I think it also depends too on what sort of deck that you are trying to construct while drafting. Because, for example, if you're trying to go, oh, I've drafted Daisy and a bunch of 2 mana 2/2s at Quest for 2, maybe Knock is not worth it because your plan is to be an aggressive deck. You're trying to get to 20 lore before your opponent even knows what's going on. Or if you're trying to go for a more control style, the Knock might be interesting. I know for a fact, I played Sealed the other day, and I was going for more of a control style deck where my games went to like turn 8, 9, 10 because I was controlling the board so slow and I had these big haymaker threats that I was able to drop on like turn 7, turn 8, turn 9 because I was playing a rather more controlling deck. So it really depends on what your play style is and what you're drafting and stuff. But yeah, by all means, if you're low on the R and bread, get some removal. If you need more bombs, pick the bombs. You know, not everything is finite, and that's what's interesting about draft. Is it's all scenario based. It's all about what cards are coming to you, what kind of deck you're trying to build. So your mileage may vary in every given circumstance. This is more of just a general overview about some ideas to think about the general picks you want to pick. But yeah, you know, don't just be hyper focused on, oh, you know, I have to have, you know, X amount of bombs and X amount of removal. You know, it ebb and flows, and that's what's interesting about draft.
We have one more example for you all. This is where you are now making your 8th pick. 7 picks have already been taken from this pack. You now have, in theory, the 5 worst cards in the pack. We have Ulf, Merlin's Cottage, the Queen with Ward, Steel Chromacon, and Donald Duck Daisy's Date. What do you gentlemen think about this remaining pack?
Yeah, this one's definitely tough. There's not a lot of great options. I think for me though, depending on what I need, I would probably go with. It has to be Ulf. He's not very exciting, but he quests for 2. He's pretty aggressive. Like 4 attack is interesting. He's at least inkable. So that's where this is like a perfect example of kind of like a dud card where it's like it's not the worst. I think like Merlin's Cottage is probably the worst, or the Queen is the worst. But he's a good gap filler, right? Because he quests for 2, he can maybe take something out. So I think it's definitely Ulf for me.
Yeah, I don't have much of a different opinion. My pick would also be Ulf. The only thing I'll say in addition is that you would consider Donald Duck if you had a lot of 4 costs already and you were slimmer on the 3 cost side. Sometimes you just need a 2/4 to answer those aggressive 2/2 questers that quest for 2. And sometimes a 4 cost is just too slow to deal with that. So if they were both even, I agree. I would take Ulf just for a little more bigger stats, just the bigger numbers, even if he's a little slower. But if you need ways to counter early aggression, even if it's not optimal, sometimes you just need a 3 cost 2/4.
Yeah, definitely agree. And sometimes people even take like, and it's also based off synergies too. Like if you have some location based synergy, maybe like a Pacha that gains you lore if you have a location. Sure, take the Merlin's Cottage. Like it synergizes with your deck. It's not the worst. It's definitely not a pack one pick. But now that you're getting towards the end, you could probably be like, okay, this card's not amazing, but it does somewhat synergize with my deck. So there's always, always exceptions, always rules and thumbs. Just remember that.
All right. Well, that will end our simulation of packs for draft and our discussions about what we think are the best cards in those kind of interesting packs. Any last thoughts on drafting for Lorcana, gentlemen?
Yes, I have one important one. It is totally okay to draft a card because you want it, even if you don't think you're going to play it. If there's a card that you know you're going to want to play in your constructed deck and it comes around, and even though it's not going to be great in draft, like some of the legendaries are not particularly great without a deck built around them, you go ahead and take that card and don't let anyone shame you for doing it.
Yeah, and just remember, have fun. That's all we're about.
Thank you both for a very riveting draft discussion. If you have any questions about drafting, please, by all means, write a comment or just talk to us in person. We would love to help out with drafting. We would love to help give you some guidance about what cards you should pick. If you just want to open a pack next to us, we'll give you our tips about what we think of the best cards are. I think it's worthwhile to think about what is your number 1 pick, what is your number 2 pick, and just kind of work those pathways in your mind. This is one of the most fun formats I think that exists in card gaming, period. I think it might be my favorite format as a whole. I really like trying to use the most out of cards that you wouldn't otherwise use and kind of combos that maybe you wouldn't have seen otherwise. But it makes it very interesting and fun and gives a lot of these cards new life. Like who doesn't, well, maybe not this case, but who wouldn't really want to use Ulf?
He's everyone's favorite mime.
All right.
Right?
From that movie he was in.
Yeah.
If you all find this kind of content useful, please let us know. Write a comment, leave a like, give us your feedback. We like talking about game strategies, so if this is the kind of stuff that you want to see, we are happy to provide it. We are happy to talk about it. Also, leave a comment if you have any ideas about what our next video should be for the team and education playlist. Thank you both for joining us. We will see you in the next one.
Bye.